I'm Melissa, and wow, what a keynote, huh? I am so excited by the next era of software at Kong. Kuma, Envoy, Studio, I cannot wait to get hands-on with this, and all the stuff that's going to be introduced over the next couple of days. I am also super excited to be sharing the stage for the next half an hour with 4 absolutely incredible leaders. So let me bring them up. We have Alex, who is the head of enterprise API programs at Rakuten. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
We've got Nancy, who is the PM of data protection at AWS and the CEO and co-founder of Advancing Women in Product. Welcome, Nancy. We've got Peter, who's flown in all the way from Melbourne, a very cool city. He is the head of technology platforms and API gateways at National Australia Bank. And we have Preeti, who is the VP of Engineering at HashiCorp. So firstly, thank you all so much for joining me. Welcome to Kong Summit. Welcome to our first panel of the conference. We've been speaking a little bit beforehand. We heard this morning about what the next era of software looks like. Things like cloud, automation, machine learning, everything being smartly connected. It's crazy how much there is to do. What I'm really excited to learn about is what really the next era of software means for you, because it's obviously different for each one of us and for every single organization. Peter, when we were speaking, you were telling me some really cool stuff that you're doing at National Australia Bank with cloud.
Yeah, so we sort of in the last 18 months have moved from a centralized API development capability to a decentralized API capability. And for us, we've got a cloud-first strategy. So moving from this centralized to decentralized, we had a look at what was available around the API gateway market. And we looked at all the native gateways that were available, and based on our user set, it was probably not fit for purpose at that time. So we actually explored the market on API gateways across the board and ended up picking Kong. Mm-hmm. So we basically containerized it, and then we deployed it in an ECS cluster in AWS.
Nice.
And now we're basically providing, it's a multi-tenanted environment, so each of the development teams have their own instance, so they can run and manage their own API gateway as such. But we provide the gateway as a SaaS service. So the teams themselves don't necessarily have to have gateway expertise embedded in each of the teams. They can just focus on delivering business value for their products. And we provide the gateway as a service, as an internal SaaS offering. Mm-hmm.
Nice. And you have got some automation that you're building in around that as well, I believe.
Yes, so we've got as part of the service, we've built what we call a CLI tool. And this CLI tool, effectively you get your API definition or your Swagger, and you import it into this tool. And we've built a lot of the governance and the standards for the API definitions inside the tool. So if you actually adhere to all of the standards, this tool will deploy and publish your API into your Kong environment, cool. And also publish it into our internal developer portal. So then what that does, it allows any engineer across the organization to log into the portal and see what is running in our environment real time. And we built a workflow where you can actually request access to any of the APIs that are currently live for reuse across the organization. And that tool really just is an abstract layer. So a lot of the development team needs to know, all they need to know is they've got the common interface, which is the CLI tool that we built, and they don't really need to know the complexities of running and manage a gateway. So it's just a CLI tool over the top of it, and we can chop and change cloud providers, we can chop and change gateways, and it's seamless to the end users for us. So yeah, it's a pretty funky little tool that we built.
That sounds really fun.
Yeah.
And Preeti, we heard this morning from some amazing open source projects that are obviously incredibly important to the industry and to us. And I know that you do quite a lot with open source at HashiCorp as well.
Yeah, that's right. So HashiCorp, our roots are in open source software. We've got 6 projects out there, Vagrant and Packer, and you find Vagrant and Packer in pretty much every sort of modern dev pipeline that exists. As well as we've been sort of pioneers around the whole infrastructure as code category with Terraform, dynamic secrets management with Vault. We have a service discovery, service mesh product called Console, as well as a runtime scheduler called Nomad. Now, what's really interesting for us is our products, our open source products, are downloaded. Last year, the number of downloads was over 40 million.
Wow.
And so the numbers speak for themselves, right? Open source is here. Open source is being used. Prior to me joining HashiCorp, I was running a pretty large organization at Yahoo, and open source was everywhere. So we see that empowerment of the practitioner and the developer around using open source products. And then at least for us at HashiCorp, our enterprise offerings are targeting more the solving of sort of organizational complexity that happens. So if you're running, let's say, teams of people or multi-data centers and so on. But our goal is really to enable kind of that core use case, the technical problems that are solved, to be enabling that in the open source community so that we can get practitioners really using and loving our tools. One pattern we see a lot of is along the lines of what Peter was talking about. We see sort of large enterprises taking our software and delivering it as internal services. So with Vault, for instance, it's pretty common to have a central team that will sort of enable a Vault as a service offering within the company, and then all that the developers need to care about is sort of that secrets management API.
That's really cool. Yeah. And how about some of the other technologies that we're seeing, like containers, machine learning, that kind of stuff? Are they driving some of the direction of the products that your team's built?
Absolutely. I think the one reality, and I lived this when I was at Yahoo, is multi-everything is here, right? And there was a little bit of a talk about this, all the things, right? So we see customers running not just multiple clouds, but also multiple technology stacks within their existing environments. And while it's really great to sit around here and talk about microservices and serverless and all of that, the reality in a customer's environment is it takes time and effort to get there. And so how do we provide products and tooling that sort of enable that journey without needing a massive rip or replace or a lift and shift? And every cloud project I've seen that's been a lift and shift, the companies have regretted it pretty seriously. So our focus, what multi means for us in the product line is enabling sort of an easy on-ramp, enabling customers to kind of get started with that open source, with the practitioner experience, and sort of taking steps towards what we call a cloud operating model.
So really what I'm hearing from both of you is, let's get something in quickly, let's start small, let's scale it out, let's enable our internal teams to be productive, let's treat our internal customers as important customers.
Right.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you. Alex, you're working on some really cool stuff at Rakuten, right?
Yes, I'd like to think so. So at the, I'm in the API technology section, so we're primarily working on APIs, including, some on Kong and some are also not on Kong, and we're really trying to work with all of the teams throughout the entire group that are working with APIs and enable them as well. So one thing we're looking at is machine learning and how we can use that to give additional insights to the teams who, sometimes we don't know as much as we like to about our own APIs and how they actually work. So something like the Kong Brain is, exciting for us, especially how it can generate the documentation, the Swagger automatically. Yep. And we're also looking to utilize machine learning to also give those insights to all the teams in Rakuten. So we'd like all the APIs to maybe be on Kong, but they're not all there yet. So but we do want to give the additional insights to the teams who are not on Kong. So we're looking into that.
That's super cool. I love all this stuff. Nancy, how about you? What are some of the innovative projects that you guys are working on at AWS?
Sure. So while I can't speak much to the internal architectures, but I think one of the common themes that have come up is that with service meshes, we've really discovered that they've given rise to emergent behavior. Because when you have so many interconnected systems, as you can imagine, within AWS, we launch about hundreds of different products every year. Don't want to spoil the surprise at reInvent, so you have to wait until then to hear about all of them. But that creates a lot of challenges, right? As you can imagine, predicting SLAs that are customer-facing as well as SLOs that are internal-facing. So wouldn't it be great to have something that can predict, so for example, automatic load balancing algorithms, right? Predicting when things happen and doing automatic stress testing in that sense. So I've definitely seen a lot of innovation come up from that area, and with partners like Kong and HashiCorp, excited to see what comes next.
So am I. And some of the stuff that we're seeing in general is completely changing the way that we have to work internally, the way that we have to work with customers, the way that we have to test things and make sure that our data is secure. How much of an impact has this had already? Nancy, let's start with you. How much of an impact has this had already in how your teams operate, how you communicate, and who you communicate with?
In terms of data privacy or security?
Both.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, within data protection, and this is not just specific to AWS, but also other backup recovery providers as well as security providers, is within AWS. That's where products such as IAM policies, different roles, security tokens, as Preeti had mentioned, right, where that all comes into play. Because ultimately, if you're going to locate your data not in a physical data center, but trust it with a cloud provider, whether it be AWS, Azure, and so on and so forth, you want to make sure that data is secure and is protected. So a lot of work and different innovations have gone into play with how to securitize your data, how to make sure that no rogue actor goes in and intentionally deletes important files that you might need.
Yeah, if I can add to that, the other area that we're seeing a lot of security changes happening in, of course, is service identities, right? The IP address was always kind of the identity that was so heavily protected, and that is no longer the case as services move around and there isn't a well-defined perimeter. So some of the innovation we're seeing with the service mesh pieces, that's really exciting because it holds kind of the promise or the potential of being able to, in a non-invasive way, kind of reinvent your network security and really move the needle on being more dynamic and being secure.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Are any of you working with service mesh yet? Playing around with it?
Not at the moment.
Not yet. Soon. Kuma's available.
We're definitely interested, and we're looking into that, but yeah, nothing in production yet.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
One thing I'll just add is what we are seeing from our customers is before they actually get to the point of using the service mesh, like step one is service discovery, right? And so that's where we see a lot of usage, kind of just making sure that the service discovery foundation is in place. And then from there, they're building onto the service mesh.
Mm-hmm. What about things like IoT, wearable tech, smart tech? Are these conversations that you're all having internally or with some of your external consumers as well?
Not as much
Not
for
yet.
us. No. I mean, our
There's so
role
much to
is
do.
in the infrastructure space, so not as much. We do, actually, let me take that back. We do see, for instance, with Vault, right? We do have customers, large telcos, where set-top boxes are actually authenticating against a central wall. So we're starting to see that pattern where sort of the tech devices and the proliferation still needs to make sure that they are accessing security tokens and identity, and they're all sort of coming back into a system like Vault.
Yep.
So that use case definitely is top of mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the org that I sit in within AWS Storage, Automation and Messaging recently incorporated IoT org as well. And so thinking about data protection for IoT devices, given the fact that today many of them operate on different protocols, is going to be one of the challenges and interesting challenges to solve.
In GraphQL, I mean, we've heard about that this morning already. It's getting more and more demand. Is GraphQL something that you guys are providing services in?
So we do have some APIs that are using GraphQL,
Yep.
and yeah, it's definitely some teams choose to take that approach. Some are more comfortable with the RESTful.
I mean, we need to support both now, right?
Yes,
We need to support everything.
Yes, we do.
And one of the most exciting things that you're doing at Rakuten is your network.
Yes, yes. So it's not our team, but Rakuten is planning to launch a mobile network in Japan, and also we are really excited about the 5G. And Rakuten, we have many different services from online marketplace to travel site to even the sports teams we have. So we're really wondering what kind of how we can really deliver next generation services over the 5G technology.
What kinds of things are you kind of playing around with to support that? Or let me rephrase this. Have there been things that you've been trying around with and so far kind of discarded because maybe you're not organizationally ready or the technology isn't quite fit for it? What are some of the almost failure stories that you can learn from?
So from my perspective, one of the failures that we had was, we went to this, multi-tenanted environment for the first time. And as we were onboarding more and more tenants, we got to a point where we had to actually halt onboarding because we were basically running out of one AWS account within our VPC, and we grew so quickly, we ran out of IP addresses. And then we started hitting all these constraints and limits, and it was taking weeks to do upgrades and bring on more and more tenants. So we actually halted the whole onboarding process for about a month. We re-architected the way we were managing and onboarding this multi-tenanted platform.
Yep.
And we ended up landing on 5 different accounts and slightly changing the way we built out this multi-tenanted platform.
Yep.
It comes with its own challenges, which we're working through, but we grew so quickly. We onboarding teams on a daily basis, and then it was going hourly, and then before you knew it. So yeah, it was an interesting month. We did a lot of singing and dancing. We were trying to onboard at the same time as slow down, and people were going, stop onboarding. But it was fun. It was one of the failures that we learnt, and now we're sharing it with others across the organisation and others out there. So yeah, that was probably one of the failures that I could probably share with you the last 12 months.
Sharing.
Yeah.
That's a great example. I'd like to circle back to something you said a few minutes ago, Preeti, about how you're kind of almost empowering your engineers to be practitioners. What we're seeing a lot of is the definition of what it means to be a developer is changing. The types of things you need to think about, the level of autonomy you need to have. In fact, maybe considering your VP of engineering, I'd love to hear a bit more about how some of the working practices have changed at HashiCorp to enable you to innovate at speed, to enable you to still be able to serve your customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that makes HashiCorp unique is engineering is 100% distributed and remote. So literally all of us work out of our homes. And so that sort of adds another unique challenge. What we find, of course, is that our work environment is GitHub with open source. We're contributing and collaborating in GitHub all day long. Getting that feedback from the community is really tight loop because our engineers are looking at the issues and PRs that come in and are sort of practicing the the tooling and the usage of that tooling and the model that the tooling puts forth as well on a daily basis. We clearly sort of use our own products internally as well. We just, a few weeks ago at HashiConf, launched Terraform Cloud, which is a cloud-based offering. Now, as you can imagine, it runs on our own products as well, right? So we kind of have that tight loop operating. And in terms of just how we work, we write down a lot of things. So we have a very strong RFC process. We do get product requirements from product management. And just the nature of being remote, we feel like that asynchronous communication is much more thought through because you're sort of analyzing and putting things down and really working through that versus having kind of one-off conversations that you're not following up on. So it's an exciting model, and it's working well for us. And we've been sharing a little bit more of how that's working, and it's been really well appreciated as well.
That sounds awesome. Some of the stuff and some of the speed at which you're releasing stuff is incredible. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Nancy, we've had a few conversations as well about how you've kind of set up a bit of your internals. Can you speak a bit more about that?
Sure. So being on the product management side, very similar to what Preeti said, right? Engineers should be practitioners. This is something that I learned when I was a product manager back at Google, which is as a PM, you should dog food your own product, right? Because you yourself are the best QA that you can possibly be for your feature or whatever you might be designing. So that's something that I try to tease out whenever I interview candidates, and especially since it sounds like all three of the other panelists use AWS to some extent, right? When I hire what we call technical product managers onto my team, that's where we go into, have they gone through scenarios in which they've tested their own product and found bugs in the process?
Out of interest, actually, who here is using one cloud environment, one and only one?
Wow.
Who's using more than one? Who has no idea what they're using?
Thank you for being honest.
So one of the things that, maybe a bit of a side tangent, but one of the things that I found really interesting recently is in August, the Business Roundtable said that for the first time ever, this is about 180 of the CEOs of the top companies gather together and they agree what their priorities are. And for the first time ever this summer, they said, shareholder profits is obviously a number one priority, but it is no longer the number one priority. Corporate or social responsibility is now very important. How much does this play a role? I mean, we're all in a technical field, right? And you could say, well, I mean, is that related? How much of a role do you think that plays in what the next era of software looks like?
So at Rakuten, actually, I think it's a big part. Our mission is actually to empower people and society through innovation. So it's something that's happening. It's discussions we have at kind of company-wide level. Is everything that we're building is to empower society. So I think at Rakuten certainly it's there. It's in the back of our minds, and maybe it's not something like with every sprint. It's like, okay, what are we going to do for society this sprint? But it's always there. It's something we're thinking about.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Nice.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in addition to simply saying, your product has, let's say, 11 nines of durability, or it's, sharded across multiple places, when buyers are thinking about services and products today, and this is, agnostic of different companies, right, I've worked with or interacted with, is how are you impacting the community? And so part of that has been the reason why I started a nonprofit organization called Advancing Women in Product when I was a PM at Google, which is bring all the leaders together, agnostic of who you work for, where you work, right, of how do we together help bridge the pipeline problem. Because if you look at some of the leadership in tech, right, there's still a lot of work to do in terms of making that community more diverse. Because ultimately, when you have more diverse decision makers, that only benefits the product and ultimately your bottom line.
Yeah, completely agree with you. And you're doing a talk pretty much straight after this, right? Or in fact, I know we're running a bit over, but starting immediately after this, I believe, at lunch.
For sure. Yeah, happy to answer any questions about what we do and where we operate. We're also a global organization.
So I guess, I mean, I know we're kind of in between everybody and lunch, but I just want to wrap up by asking, have you got kind of any final thoughts, any lessons that you would like to share with everybody in the audience as we look to the future, as we try out what this huge and ever exponentially growing list of technologies is that we need to adopt?
I would say observability,
Yeah.
in my opinion, because given that there are more technologies being built, humans are ultimately, we have a limited memory or the ability to connect the dots and find what is the root cause of problems. And so that's where, back to, I believe, Preeti's earlier point on service meshes, right, is being able to identify emergent behavior and combine observability with management to help you identify problems earlier and also give your customers, at the end of the day, a better and more predictable SLA.
Nice.
For myself, it's probably, really leveraging cloud native where possible.
Yep.
Really leveraging technical services, leveraging other SaaS capabilities, because I find the business spend a lot of time and effort running platforms and software when they really should be focusing on their actual product themselves. So that's probably a bit of word of advice for myself.
And coming from a bank, if a global bank can do this,
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And I think for me, it's also just trying things out. Open source is such a wonderful paradigm because you can actually try the software and see if it works for you, right?
Yeah.
So you're not making a big decision. That the days of sort of, having to go through and make a kind of a final decision because you were going to pay millions of dollars are sort of behind us, right? So actually trying things out in open source and working through what that might mean and how that grows as you're growing, your organization is evolving.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I guess my last question really then, when it comes to adopting open source and then productizing it, putting it into your pipelines, communicating back to the business who may not know what the technology is, how important is it to have a rigorous process around that, or is it still successful to kind of just try things out and stick them in, and over time, eventually things will come firmer?
So I know we'll probably differ on this, right? From the banking environment versus a vendor. But even sort of looking back at my experience from Yahoo, the projects that were successful were always grassroots, right?
Yeah.
So it was engineers who are really passionate about the problems they're solving. They're finding products and tools that solve those problems really well and are very easy to use. And that passion then kind of snowballs into a much bigger effort within the company. And so before you realize it, you're running your mission-critical apps on something that started off as a grassroots project.
Yep.
And it's at that point that the policy and the governance and all of those pieces sort of start becoming more critical, right? And so that's the adoption sort of that we are seeing, and both from sort of my vendor perspective, from my experience at HashiCorp, and then from a user perspective, from my experience at Yahoo, is it just sort of starts with that grassroots focus.
Thank you. Awesome. But I mean, sadly, we are out of time. I wish that we could keep talking for ages. Thank you all so much, the four of you, for being here, for traveling. Some of these two have traveled from Melbourne, from Tokyo, still, slightly closer. But thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.